The Battle of Jenin took place in the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank in April 1–11, 2002. Israel Defense Forces entered the camp, and other areas under the administration of the Palestinian Authority, during the Second Intifada. As part of Operation Defensive Shield, the Jenin camp was targeted after Israel reported that it had served as a launch site for numerous terrorist attacks against both Israeli civilians and Israeli towns and villages in the area. The IDF employed infantry, commando forces, and assault helicopters. Palestinian militants had prepared for a fight, booby-trapping the camp, and after an Israeli column walked into an ambush, the army began to rely more heavily on the use of armored bulldozers to clear out booby traps laid inside the camp. On April 11, Palestinian militants began to surrender. Israeli troops began withdrawing from the camp on April 18. On April 7, senior Palestinian official Saeb Erekat suggested to CNN that some 500 Palestinians had been killed in the camp. 5 days later, when the fighting stopped, PAR Secretary Ahmed Abdel-Rahman told UPI that the number was in the thousands, hinting, along with other Palestinian figures, that Israel had snatched bodies, buried Palestinians in mass graves and under the rubble of ruined buildings, and otherwise conducted on a scale compatible with genocide. Stories of hundreds of civilians being killed in their homes as they were demolished spread throughout international media. Subsequent investigations found no evidence to substantiate claims of a massacre, and official totals from Palestinian and Israeli sources confirmed between 52 and 54 Palestinians, mostly gunmen, and 23 IDF soldiers as having been killed in the fighting. Background: the Jenin refugee camp was established in 1953 within Jenin's municipal boundaries on land that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency leased from the government of Jordan, covering an area of 0.423 square kilometers. In 2002, it was home to 13,055 UNRWA registered Palestinian refugees. Most of the camp's residents originally hail from the Carmel Mountains and region of Haifa, and many maintain close ties with their relatives inside the Green Line. Other camp residents include Palestinians from Gaza and Tulkarm who moved into the area in the late 1970s, and those who came from Jordan after the establishment of the Palestinian Authority with the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993. Israel considered the influence of Islamist organizations in the camp to be relatively mild, compared to other camps. Organizational affiliations in the camp differed from those of the city, in that they were based mostly on who could provide financial support, rather than on ideology. Camp militants repelled attempts by PAR seniors to exercise authority in the camp. In a February 2002 show of force, residents burned 7 vehicles that were sent by the governor of Jenin and opened fire on the PAR men. Atta Abu Rumayya was designated the chief security officer of the camp by its residents. He oversaw access to the entrances to the camp, instituted roadblocks, investigated suspicious characters, and kept unwanted strangers away. Known to Palestinians as the Martyrs' Capital, the camp's militants, some 200 armed men, included members of Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, Tanzim, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas. By Israel's count, at least 28 suicide bombers were dispatched from the Jenin camp from 2000 to 2003 during the Second Intifada. One of the key planners for several of the attacks was Mahmoud Tawal, who worked in a record store while also heading the local PIJ cell. Israeli Army Weekly Bar Mahani attributes at least 31 militant attacks, totaling 124 victims, to Jenin during the same period, more than any other city in the West Bank. Prior to the undertaking of the Israeli operation, the IDF spokesman attributed 23 suicide bombings and 6 attempted bombings to Palestinians from Jenin. Major attacks and suicide bombings linked by Israel to Palestinian militant groups in Jenin included the Matzah restaurant suicide bombing. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs attributed attacks to Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Fatah. Prelude. Israel's Operation Defensive Shield began on March 29 with an incursion into Ramallah, followed by Tulkarem and Kalkiar on April 1, Bethlehem on April 2, and Jenin and Nablus on April 3. By this date, 6 Palestinian cities and their surrounding towns, villages, and refugee camps had been occupied by the IDF. Unlike other camps, the organizations in Jenin had a joint commander, Hazem Ahmad Rayhan Kaba, known as Abu Jandal, an officer in the Palestinian National and Islamic Forces who had fought in Lebanon, served in the Iraqi army, and who had been involved in several encounters with the IDF. He set up a war room and divided the camp into 15 subsectors, deploying about 20 armed men in each. During the battle, he began calling himself the Martyr Abu Jandal. Since the previous Israeli withdrawal, Palestinian militants had prepared by booby-trapping both the town and camp's streets in a bid to trap Israeli soldiers. Following his surrender to Israeli forces, Tibet Mardovi, an Islamic Jihad fighter, said that Palestinian fighters had spread between 1,000 and 2,000 bombs and booby traps throughout the camp, some big ones for tanks, most others the size of water bottles. Omar the engineer, a Palestinian bomb maker, said that some 50 homes were booby-trapped. We chose old and empty buildings and the houses of men who were wanted by Israel because we knew the soldiers would search for them. More powerful bombs with remote detonators were placed inside trash bins in the street and inside the cars of wanted men. Omar said that everyone in the camp, including children, knew where the explosives were located, and noted that this constituted a major weakness to their defenses, since during the Israeli incursion, the wires to more than a third of the bombs were cut by soldiers guided by collaborators. After an IDF action in Ramallah in March resulted in television broadcast footage that was considered unflattering, the IDF High Command decided not to allow reporters to join the forces. Like other cities targeted in Defensive Shield, Jenin was declared a closed military zone, and placed under curfew before the entrance of Israeli troops, remaining sealed off throughout the invasion. Water and electricity supplies to the city were also cut off and remained unavailable to residents throughout. According to a framed harsh before the fighting started, the IDF used loudspeakers broadcasting in Arabic to urge the locals to evacuate the camp, and he estimates that some 11,000 left. Stephanie Gutman also noted that the IDF used bullhorns and announcements in Arabic to inform the residents of the invasion, and that the troops massed outside the camp for a day because of rain. She estimated that 1,200 remained in the camp, but that it was impossible to tell how many of them were fighters. After the battle, Israeli intelligence estimated that half the population of non-combatants had left before the invasion, and 90% had done so by the third day, leaving around 1,300 people. Others estimated that 4,000 people had remained in the camp. Some camp residents reported hearing the Israeli calls to evacuate, while others said they did not. Many thousands did leave the camp, with women and children usually permitted to move into the villages in the surrounding hills or the neighboring city. However, the men who left were almost all temporarily detained, instructed by Israeli soldiers to strip before they were taken away. Journalists who entered Jenin following the invasion remarked that heaps of discarded clothing in the ruined streets showed where they were taken into custody. As the fighting started, Ali Safori, a commander of the Islamic Jihad's Al-Quds brigades in the camp, said, "We have prepared unexpected surprises for the enemy. We are determined to pay him back double, and teach him a lesson he will not forget." We will attack him on the home front, in Jerusalem, in Haifa, and in Jaffa, everywhere. We welcome them, and we have prepared a special graveyard in the Jenin camp for them. We swore on the martyrs that we would place a curfew on the Zionist cities and avenge every drop of blood spilled upon our sacred land. We call on the soldiers of Sharon to refuse his orders, because entering the Jenin camp, the capital of the martyrs' operations, will, Allah willing, be the last thing they do in their lives. The Israeli command sent in 3 thrusts consisting mainly of the reservist 5th Infantry Brigade from the town of Jenin to the north, as well as a company of the Nahal Brigade from the southeast and Battalion 51 of the Golani Brigade from the southwest. The force of 1,000 troops also included Shayatet 13 and Dov Devon Unit, Special Forces, the Armored Corps, and combat engineers with armored bulldozer for neutralizing the roadside bombs that would line the alleys of the camp according to military intelligence. Anticipating the heaviest resistance in Nablus, IDF commanders sent 2 regular infantry brigades there, assuming they could take over the Jenin camp in 48 to 72 hours with just the 1 reservist brigade. The force's entry was delayed until April 2 due to rain. The 5th Infantry Brigade did not have any experience in close-quarters combat and did not have a commander when Operation Defensive Shield started. Since the last commander's service ended a few days earlier, his substitute was a reserve officer, Lieutenant Colonel Yehuda Yedidia, who got his rank after the operation began. His soldiers were not trained for urban fighting. Battle. Israeli forces entered Jenin on April 2. On the first day, Reserve Company Commander Moshe Gerstner was killed in a PIJ sector. This caused a further delay. By April 3, the city was secured, but the fighting in the camp was just beginning. Israeli sources say that the IDF incursion into the camp relied primarily on infantry to minimize civilian casualties, but interviews with eyewitnesses suggest that tanks and helicopters were also used in the first 2 days. In Pierre Rehov's documentary The Road to Jenin, a Palestinian doctor claimed that on the second day, the city's hospital was hit by 11 tank shells. However, both Rehov's film and Richard Lanz's 2005 film Pallywood, the supposed hits shown on Jenin Hospital were compared to an actual building hit by Merkava tank shelling, suggesting that the supposed hit marks were staged. To reach the camp, a Caterpillar D9 armored bulldozer drove along a 3/4-mile stretch of the main street to clear it of booby traps. An Israeli Engineering Corps officer logged 124 separate explosions set off by the bulldozer. A Fatah leader in the camp later said that it was only when his forces saw the Israelis advancing on foot that they decided to stay and fight. On the third day, the Palestinians were still dug in, defying Israeli expectations, and by then 7 Israeli soldiers had been killed. Mardovi later testified to having killed 2 of them from close range, using an M16. As the IDF advanced, the Palestinians fell back to the heavily defended camp center, the Hawashan district. Al-1 Cobra helicopters were used to strike Palestinian positions on rooftops using wire-guided missiles, and about a dozen armored D9 bulldozers were deployed, widening alleys, clearing paths for tanks, and detonating booby traps. Palestinians said that Israeli troops rode atop the bulldozers and fired rocket-propelled grenades. On April 6, Mahmoud Tawalb and 2 other militants went into a house so as to get close enough to a tank or armored D9 bulldozer to plant a bomb. Tawalb and another militant were killed during the action. A British military expert working in the camp for Amnesty International reported that a D9 driver saw him, and subsequently rammed a wall down onto him and one of his fighters. The Islamic Jihad website announced that Tawalb had died when he blew up in his booby-trapped home on the Israeli soldiers inside it. and that he had thwarted all attempts by the occupation to evacuate the camp residents to make it easier for the Israelis to destroy the camp on the heads of the fighters. On that same day, IDF attack helicopters reportedly increased their missile attacks, which slowed but did not cease the next day. IDF Chief of Staff Shaul Mofaz urged the officers to speed things up. They asked for 24 more hours. Mofaz told reporters that the fighting would be complete by the end of the week, April 6. In some of the sectors, the forces were advancing at a rate of 50 meters a day. Israeli intelligence assumed that the vast majority of the camp's residents were still in it. Most commanders argued that this obligated a careful advance for fear of striking civilians, and warned that using excessive force would cost the lives of hundreds of Palestinians. Lieutenant Colonel Ofek Bukris, commander of the 51st Battalion, was left in a minority opinion, saying, "We're being humiliated here for 4 days now." When Mofaz instructed the officers to be more aggressive and fire 5 anti-tank missiles at every house before entering, one of them contemplated disobedience. Meanwhile, when asked how long he thought his forces could last given the superiority of the Israeli forces, Abu Jandal said, "No, that's not true. We have the weapon of surprise. We have the weapon of honor. We have the divine weapon, the weapon of Allah who stands at our side. We have weapons that are better than theirs. I am the one with the truth, and I put my faith in Allah, while they put their faith in a tank." Bukris continued to employ the tactics of softening up enemy resistance with anti-tank fire and extensive use of bulldozers, developing a method to expose IDF soldiers to less risk. First, a bulldozer would ram the corner of the house, opening a hole, and then an IDF Akari troop carrier would arrive to disembark troops into the house, where they would clear it of any militants found inside. Bukris's battalion was advancing faster than the reserve forces, creating a bridgehead within the camp that attracted most of the Palestinian fire. During the first week of fighting, the battalion suffered 5 casualties. On April 8, Golani Brigade Commander Colonel Timir arrived from Nablus, having crawled with Bukris to the front line. He warned that the fighting style must be changed completely, call in more troops and perhaps take the command out of the reserve brigade's hand. A total of 30 Palestinians and 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in Jenin on that same day. By evening, Division Commander Brigadier General Eyal Schlein told his men that the mission must be accomplished by 6 p.m. on April 9. Bukris himself was later badly wounded. At 6 a.m. on April 9, Reserve Battalion 7020's support company was ordered to form a new line, west of the former one. Its commander, Major Oded Golum, set out with the force to take a position in a new house. He strayed from the original path, perhaps for tactical considerations, but failed to report to his commander. The force walked into a Palestinian ambush, finding themselves in an inner courtyard surrounded by tall houses and under fire from all directions, and were also attacked by a suicide bomber. Rescue forces from the company and the battalion hurried to the location and were attacked with small arms fire and explosive charges. The exchange of fire went on for several hours. A reconnaissance aircraft documented much of the fight, and the footage was transmitted live and was watched in the Israeli Central Command war room by the high-ranking officers. 13 Israeli soldiers were killed, and the Palestinians managed to snatch 3 of the bodies and drag them into a nearby house. Colonel Ram, the Shirtet commander who had fought in the camp with his men, quickly assembled a rescue force. Mofaz told him that negotiation over the bodies might force the IDF to halt the operation and get it in trouble, similar to the 2000 Hezbollah cross-border raid. On the edge of the alley leading to the bathtub, Ram questioned the wounded reservists. Finally, he broke with his troops to the nearby house and engaged Palestinian militants, eventually locating the bodies. In the afternoon, all Israeli casualties were evacuated from the area. It became the deadliest day for the IDF since the end of the 1982 Lebanon War. During that day, the IDF censored reports on the events, leading to a wave of rumors. Partial information leaked through phone calls made by reservists and internet sites. By evening, when Chief of Central Command, Brigadier General Yitzhak Eitan, had a press conference, there were rumors of a helicopter carrying dozens of troops shot down, the death of the Ramatkal's deputy, and a heart attack suffered by the Minister of Defense. After the ambush, all Israeli forces began to advance by Buttress's tactics, utilizing armored bulldozers and Akarit APCs in their push. Israeli forces also relied heavily on increased missile strikes from helicopters. Several officers demanded that F-16 jets be sent to bomb the camp, but the IDF High Command refused. The dozen bulldozers and APCs pushed deep into the heart of the camp, flattening a built-up area of 200 square yards, destroying militant strongpoints. Palestinian resistance quickly collapsed, and the remaining militants retreated into the Hawashin neighborhood. IDF forces then began mopping up the final resistance in the Hawashin neighborhood. At 7 a.m. on April 11, the Palestinians began to surrender. Kaba refused to surrender and was killed, being among the last to die. Zakaria Zubidi was among the only fighters who did not surrender. He slipped out of the area surrounded by the IDF, moved through the houses and left. Mardavi surrendered along with Ali Suleiman al-Sadi, known as Safori, and 39 others. He later said that, "There was nothing I could do against that bulldozer.